All right, what's going on YouTube? This is BoxingWave. Now, I've told you guys recently that I was going to make a video on this, all right? I made a comment in one of my recent videos where I said that Keith Thurman has a better resume than Errol Spence, okay? Some of you guys disagree with that in the comments. So I wanted to make a video just comparing resumes. I pulled up BoxRec here, and I'm no BoxRec warrior. I actually watched these guys fights. I actually watched these fights in the past. So I'm gonna compare. I'm gonna break down their fights. All right, the key fights that they had. Um, and I think it's fair. It's a fair comparison. Keith have been boxing a little longer. And I think that has a lot to do with why I think he has a better resume. So, because he's been fighting about 5 years longer as a professional than Errol, even though they're close and around age as far as age is concerned. Keith Thurman has been fighting professionally much longer than Errol Spence. Okay, now a little disclaimer: this has nothing to do with who I think is going to win the fight. If they actually were to fight, I've been saying even before Keith got injured, I think Errol Spence would beat Keith Thurman. Okay, um, that's just my opinion. They actually have to fight to in order to prove it. This is a strictly resume only video. I think they're comparable. I think they're definitely comparable. I was looking over it a little bit. I think it's comparable, but I think Keith, being that he's been boxing longer, okay, um, I think that kind of gave him the edge because he's been fighting better fighters for a longer period of time. Okay, and I think the two, if you were to compare the two best opponents that they both face, I think there's not much of a comparison. So I'm gonna break all that down. I'm gonna run through. I'm gonna start off with Errol Spence. Okay, let's start. So let's run. Let's start at Emmanuel Larte. And the only reason why I'm bringing that up is because that was the first fight that Errol had some trouble in. Okay, he got hurt. That is the only fight that I've seen Errol in where he was badly hurt. Okay, but it was at the end of the round. He walked. He had some. He struggled a little bit to walk back to his corner, but he was recovered. By after that. All right. He won the fight and everything. It was a good fight, action-packed fight. Larte gave him a rough time, but the thing with Larte, he really didn't accomplish anything since that loss. Okay. After that, he took a couple more losses. Really didn't prove much as a welterweight. All right. He was a tough opponent for Errol at that time, but this is no one. I'm only mentioning him just in case one of you guys in the comments that wanted to bring him up, since it was a competitive fight in early Errol's career. Okay. I'm gonna skip over a few people here. I'm gonna go right up to Samuel Vargas. Now, obviously, the reason why I bring up Vargas is because he's fought Danny Garcia and he fought Amir Khan. Errol, out of the three of them, Errol performed the best against Vargas. Okay, he stopped him the earliest. Danny also fought him. Took him longer, but Danny did well against Vargas too. Amir Khan is the guy that struggled against Vargas a little bit. Okay, um, so if you want to compare Vargas, Spence's performance with Vargas to everyone else, you definitely got to give him credit for doing it better than the other top welterweights that fought Vargas. Okay. Next guy, Philo Greco. All right, these are still not elite welterweights. Okay, Philo Greco. Spence was able to stop him in 3 rounds. Khan on this fight actually stopped him earlier than that. Okay, Khan, I believe, stopped Philo Greco in 1 round. Okay, that was like his comeback fight. I think that was his first fight after he lost to Canelo. Okay, so it's just a guy that was has common opponents. Sean Porter fought Philo Greco back in the day. Sean went to distance with Philo Greco. All right, so you got to give credit to Errol Spence there as well because he was able to stop him pretty early, not as early as Khan, but it's still a solid fight. Moving on, Chris Van Herden, not really worth mentioning like that. These are step ups, but slow step ups. Chris Algieri, all right. Gotta bring him up. Chris Algieri was a former champion. All right, this is the first former champion that Errol Spence faced at welterweight. Um, Good win, good stoppage. Even though Pacquiao knocked him down like 6 times, Errol actually stopped him. Pacquiao didn't. So you got to give him credit for that. I know also Amir Khan went to distance with Chris Algieri, okay? But one thing I have to point out, because this does actually matter, Chris Algieri had a very, very close fight with Ruslan Provodnikov back at 140. That's how he won his title. Right after that, he went up to 147, had his first fight with Manny Pacquiao. Okay, as a welterweight, Chris Algieri hasn't really accomplished much. As a welterweight, he won a title at 140, moved up, and has lost his big fights. All right, he lost to Pacquiao, he lost to Khan, and he lost to Errol. Okay, so good win, definitely a good win, but nothing to brag about. Okay, it's a good move to the right direction where he is now. All right, so at that time it was a very good win. All right, but we still got to compare these wins to Keith's resume as well. All right, Leonard Bundu. Now, Leonard Bundu is an important fight because Keith actually fought him a couple of years earlier and went to distance. He dropped him early, but he went to distance with Leonard Bundu. Okay, um, I believe that this is one of those fights in Keith's career where a lot of people were shocked that he didn't get the upset. I mean, the knockout. Most of his fights before that, Keith always went for the knockout. This was the first fight that I remember seeing Keith really, really take it easy. I think maybe if not that, maybe I'm trying to think of maybe was it John Zavik? John Zavik was another guy that he went the distance with. But besides that, Leonard Bundle was one of those guys where Keith started getting a real buzz at this point, and Keith didn't stop this guy. Errol did. Errol did. Errol outperformed Keith in this comparison. So you have to give Errol a point for that because he actually stopped Leonard Bundle. Now, let's not overrate the win. They both fought him. Errol did do better in comparison to Keith, but Leonard Bundle was another guy that pretty much a career welterweight. But the two guys that he really fessed up, I know he beat. I think he beat Frankie Gavin. He beat a couple solid guys, but when it came to the top dogs of the division, he only faced two, and those two guys he faced beat him. And not only that, but Keith fought him at like what 40, and Spence fought him at 42 and retired him there. All right, the guy was on his way out. He picked up a couple good fights. I'm sure it helped with his pockets and his money, but Leonard Bundle didn't prove anything at the welterweight division. You know, he was no elite fighter. He wasn't no top dog. The two top contenders that he faced were they both beat him. Okay, now Kell Brook. Kell Brook was Spence's biggest win. His biggest win, without a doubt. Brook was undefeated as a welterweight. He went up to fight Triple G. People are going to bring that up. Triple G, smashed half his face. Errol smashed the other half. When they fought, he stopped Kell Brook. It was a great win because Kell Brook has never lost to a welterweight. Kell Brook did beat Sean Porter, who was likely to beat Spence's next opponent and who is currently a champion. So it was a big win. That is his biggest win, without a doubt. He beat Kell Brook. He stopped Kell Brook, and he went in Kell Brook's backyard to do it. Okay, so that's a huge win in my book. He beat a legitimate top welterweight. All right, a career welterweight, a big guy at welterweight. He gets all the credit in the world. People are like I said, people are going to bring up the fact that Brook came back down to 147 from 160, from taking a beating from Triple G before fighting Spence. I get that. You can make that argument, but still, a good win for Errol Spence. After that, he fought Lamont Peterson. Very, very good win. Probably his second best win, in my opinion. All right. His second best win is Lamont Peterson. And not trying to shit on Lamont. I like Lamont. He just retired, had a great career. But Lamont lost about 80 to 90% of the top fights that he fought. He's fought a lot of top fighters. Okay? He beat Amir Khan. All right? He beat a couple guys that were on their way out back at 140. But he did lose to Tim Bradley. He did get knocked out by Lucas Matisse. Okay? His last fight, he got stopped by Sergey Lipinets. Okay? He's he lost to Danny Garcia. Very, very debatable fight, but he still took the loss to Danny Garcia officially. All right. Um, he has some good wins in there. I respect him as a fighter. I thought the Felix Diaz win was a gift. Okay. But as a welterweight, Peterson lost 2 out of the 3 fights as welterweight. Okay. Let me click on click on Lamont. Who did he fight as a welterweight? Okay. He uh he fought Felix Diaz. All right, no, so that's an extra fight. And he fought Felix Diaz and he fought Danny Garcia above 140. He lost to Danny. He got a gift to Felix Diaz, in my opinion. All right, but he has a win over Felix Diaz. He beat David Avanesian, and then he lost to Spence and Lipinets. Got stopped in both fights. Okay, that's not really a good win percentage above 140. Okay, so I'm not trying to take credit out of that win, but Lamont is his second best opponent on his resume. Lamont is that, you know. Um, and then he fought Ocampo, who uh, Spence was his first. Ocampo's first step up in the welterweight division was Errol Spence, and he lost in 1 round. All right. He didn't prove anything before that, so not a great win. It's just a solid win. A stay busy fight. Mikey Garcia, I already addressed this fight. In my opinion, was a mismatch. Mikey is a great fighter, a great talent, but he had no business being up there at 147, and he had no business fighting Errol Spence as his first fight. All right. So Mikey, good win. He destroyed him, but many of us predicted this to happen. All right. Mikey moved up 2 weight divisions. Very talented fighter, but not that talented. Not to go up there and beat Spence. All right. So there goes Errol Spence's resume up to this point. The main names I mentioned, all of them, broke it down. All right. Solid career. Keith Thurman, on the other hand, all right, started much earlier, started in 2008. Spence started in 2012. Keith Thurman, notable fights. Let's start out with Carlos Cantana, all right? Good fight. Carlos Cantano's on his end days. He already lost to the rematch in Paul Williams. But at least he proved something. He lost to Miguel Cotto, but he was able to take Paul Williams' first win. That was huge. All right. But by the time that Keith got to him, he already lost to Berto. He lost in a rematch to Paul Williams. He was at his later ages of his career. All right. But still a good step up win. All right. Solid win, definitely. John Zavik, another opponent, solid win. First decision, I think is Keith's, maybe if not his first decision, one of his first decisions in his career. Solid win, nothing to brag about, just a solid win. All right. At this time, Keith, when he beat Carlos Cantana and Zavik, Spence was just becoming a professional. Okay, so Keith was already beating guys that is on a level of guys that Errol Spence was stepping up to face. All right, which was not too long ago. All right. So you got Diego Chavez, another guy that was undefeated at the time. Keith at that point was undefeated, and they were promoting it as two knockout welterweight prospects. Uh, Keith had the better resume between the two of those guys. Keith was able to stop him. Diego Chavez, after that, really didn't prove much. Had a war with Tim Bradley. Okay, uh, Keith looked much better than Tim Bradley did against Diego Chavez. All right, uh, they were both competitive fights, but Keith was able to stop him, and he just had more success throughout the fight. Uh, Tim Bradley struggled against Diego Chavez. Chavez didn't really prove anything from what I remember. I know he fought Brandon Rios. Rios had a ugly fight with him, disqualification. It was just a messy fight. Didn't prove much. So solid fight, but not something that I could go crazy about Keith Thurman beating him. I mean, there's one thing is what he was undefeated, but he really didn't accomplish too much after losing to Keith Thurman. Okay, it was just a solid opponent. Jesus Soto Carras, another solid win. Um, Jesus Soto Carras, just guess his biggest win was probably against Andre Berto. Okay, he was the third guy to beat Andre Berto. He stopped him late. I know Berto had an arm injury in that fight. Okay, so I think he was like fighting with one arm at that time. I think Berto would have won that fight if it wasn't for that. But Soto Carras, just a solid opponent, a solid welterweight, tough dude, goes to war with a lot of people. Okay, took his losses though, but solid win. Julio Diaz, another solid win. All right, another fighter where Keith Thurman looked better against guys like Jesus Soto Carras, Julio Diaz, Diego Chavez. Keith Thurman looked better against these opponents compared to a lot of other top welterweights. Did you see Julio Diaz against Sean Porter? Both fights. All right. Sean Porter struggled against Julio Diaz, especially in that first fight. All right. That was definitely a draw in that first fight. All right. So Keith Thurman destroyed Julio Diaz, moves on to Leonard Badu. I already broke that down. I have to. I don't really need to go further. That is one of the common opponents that Thurman and Spence had. Spence wins because he stopped Bundu. Keith Thurman didn't. But Spence also fought a 2 year older, already old Leonard Bundu. Okay. So Keith fought Robert Guerrero. All right. At this point, I believe this is for a title, the WBA title, and he fought Robert Guerrero and didn't stop him, but he did drop him. It was a good performance. All right, didn't have too much trouble with Robert Guerrero. I think Robert Guerrero gave Danny Garcia a better fight, but Robert Guerrero, second guy to beat Andre Berto. All right, beat Andre Berto. Was in there with Floyd at one time. He was one of the top guys at 147. Keith beat him up. While before Robert started just taking a lot of losses, Keith was able to beat him and um, decision him. Okay. Louis Collazo, another solid opponent, a guy that's been in there with a lot of fighters. He's been in there with Hatton. He's been in there with Berto. He stopped Victor Ortiz very, very early. Solid fighter, always been a solid fighter. Gave Keith some trouble, but Keith was able to stop him as well, okay? I believe Collazo stopped in his corner. I thought that was a little strange, but it is what it is, okay? Another solid opponent. Sean Porter, Keith Thurman's biggest win in his career. Sean Porter. He already lost to Kell Brook, but Keith Thurman beat him to a decision. Very, very close, debatable decision. Okay. But he has a win over Sean Porter. All right. Um, do I think that's a bigger win than the Kell Brook win over, or I'm sorry, the Errol Spence win over Kell Brook? I slightly favor the Errol Spence win, only because Errol beat. He stopped the guy that Sean Porter actually lost to. Okay, so one on one, as far as those two fights comparisons, I will give Errol Spence the slight edge. Okay, um, like I said, I know you guys are gonna come here again and say that Kell Brook was done, blah 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 blah. No, I'm giving Errol has the best win in my opinion. He beat an undefeated undefeated welterweight Kell Brook. As a welterweight, he was undefeated. All right. Sean Porter lost to Kell Brook. Keith struggled against Sean Porter. Struggled bad against Sean Porter. Okay. That fight should have been a draw in my eyes, but they gave it to Keith. All right. Um, Title match, still his best win though. And I think the third best win out of all of these wins is the Danny Garcia win. Danny Garcia, unified champion at 140, moved up to 147, collected a title at 147, and he has had a good amount of fights at 147. Okay, not a career 147 guy, but it was a great win. Keith's second best win. Um, and still a much better win than anybody else that's on Spence's resume outside of Kell Brook. Okay, I would take Danny over the Lamont Peterson. I know a few of y'all think that Peterson won that fight between him and Danny. Danny got the win, and Danny has a far better, superior resume to Lamont Peterson. All right, so Danny Garcia win was a great win, and then Josecito Lopez in a fight where it was Keith's comeback fight, and we saw how that fight went. All right, so overall, I give Keith the slight edge in resume because he just had more fights. He's been fighting more solid opponents than Errol Spence because he's had more fights. I believe that after their next fights, it's going to be a lot more debatable. All right. Because if Errol is to outperform Keith against Sean Porter, which I think he will, then we can revisit this conversation. I think Keith is literally like or two or one fights better than Spence as far as resume. I think it's very close, but I still give the slight edge to Keith Thurman. Okay, depending on how they do against their next opponents. All right. How is Keith going to do against Manny Pacquiao? If he destroys Manny Pacquiao or stops Manny Pacquiao, then we won't be debating anything. Okay, but if he either struggles or if it's a controversial win for him, or if he loses to Manny Pacquiao and Errol goes on to beat Sean Porter, without a doubt, I will have Errol above Keith Thurman as far as resume. Okay, but it really depends on their next fights. But as far as right now, I believe that Keith Thurman barely has a better resume, than Errol Spence. That's just my opinion. That's my breakdown. That's my reasoning to it. All right, so you guys are open to respond in the comments. I want to hear you guys' opinions, guys. One thing I want to do, I don't want to forget. Errol has obviously been a lot more active than Keith. It took him a lot less time to do more than Keith did. Okay, so in all fairness, you got to give Spence credit for that. You also have to factor in the fact that a lot of welterweights do not want to fight Errol. Okay, Sean is going to fight him next, but Sean, Thurman, Garcia, there's other fighters that's been at welterweight that really wasn't trying to fight Errol Spence. Okay, the only two fighters that were pushing to fight Errol Spence are two guys that weren't welterweights, Terrence Crawford and Mikey Garcia. Those are the only two. And everybody else that's called out Spence are above 147. I heard Lara call him out once. I've heard Demetrius Andrade call him out. But as far as 147 fighters, if these fighters like a Danny Garcia or even maybe Keith before he got injured, or even Sean Porter or some of the other names that's out there, if they were able to give Spence his opportunity, then maybe he would have had some of these fights done by now. But you could say the same thing about Keith Thurman. Okay, what if Maidana did want to fight him? What if Guerrero wanted to fight him earlier? What if some of these other welterweights that didn't give him a chance wanted to fight Keith Thurman earlier? So Keith Thurman, what Errol Spence is going through, Keith Thurman went through the same thing. It's just that Keith Thurman is no longer the boogeyman. Spence is one of the boogeymans, all right? The other boogeyman is Terrence Crawford. Keith Thurman is no longer the boogeyman at 147. He's actually the hunted. He's the guy that everybody wants to face at 147. Crawford, Spence, Pacquiao, Porter, all of these guys want a piece of Keith Thurman. Okay, at one point, none of them really did. All right, so plus not only that, but back then Keith Thurman was on, well, not the PBC, but the Showtime side of things, where you had Marquez still fighting. You had Pacquiao over there with Top Rank. You had Tim Bradley still fighting. You know, you had a bunch of guys that were on the complete different side, opposite side of the street, that would never fight Keith Thurman. All right. So I think Keith Thurman barely takes the edge because he's done more. All right. I think Errol Spence is creeping up. He's like one or maybe two fights away, depending on how the next fight goes. All right. So I want to hear from you guys, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.